This boy's hand was reaching for his inheritance. His shadow was holding a knife. In the ancient world, asking for your inheritance while your father was still alive had one meaning. You were saying you wished he was dead. The Aramaic word Jesus used here was halak, division of property at death. Every listener knew it. This request wasn't prodigal, it was a public death wish. If this request was a public insult, then the father's answer should have been silence, exile, or public humiliation. But why did he say yes? There is a young man in this story named Joseph, standing at a crossroads, about to say the most culturally devastating thing a son could say. He doesn't know what it will cost yet. And if the father's response was more than forgiveness, something structural, something that required a specific cultural maneuver, then this parable isn't what any of us were taught. Jesus told this parable to a specific audience, Pharisees and tax collectors in first-century Galilee. They didn't need an explanation. They lived inside the shame code this story was detonating. First-century Mediterranean society ran entirely on honor and shame. A man's worth, his family's worth, was determined by public perception, not by private character. Anthropologist Kenneth Bailey spent 40 years living in the Middle East, interviewing village elders about this parable. What they told him had never made it into Western commentaries. Every village elder Bailey interviewed gave the same answer when asked about the son's request. It was equivalent to saying, "Father, I cannot wait for you to die." In that culture, the appropriate response from the father would have been public rejection. To grant the request was to participate in your own humiliation. There's a detail in rabbinic literature most commentators skip entirely, a ceremony called Kezazah. We'll come back to it. When Jesus' audience heard the opening of this story, a younger son demanding his inheritance, there would have been a physical reaction, not sympathy, offense. Luke records this parable using the Greek word parabole, but its function here isn't illustration, it's confrontation. Jesus was dropping a cultural grenade into the middle of his audience. Joseph had grown up watching his father work the land, watching the inheritance he expected to wait decades for. At some point, waiting became intolerable. The parable opens with the younger son saying, "Father, give me the share of property that is coming to me." 5 words in English, a sentence of destruction in Aramaic. The phrase, "give me the share," in Aramaic, havli, was legal language, inheritance language, language that assumed the testator was already deceased. This conversation would not have been private. In a first-century village, a son approaching his father on a matter of property was a community event. Everyone was watching. Everyone heard. The father now had 3 options: refuse and appear to deny his son's future, rebuke and publicly shame his own household, or grant the request and be publicly humiliated. The father divided his living between them. He said yes, in public, in front of the entire village, and that decision set something in motion that no one, not even Jesus' audience, fully understood yet. Not many days later, the son gathered everything and left. In Greek, epidemason, he journeyed to a far country. He liquidated the family's land and disappeared. To liquidate land in first-century Palestine, ancestral land, covenantal land, was to sever the family's connection to their inheritance from God. This wasn't financial recklessness, it was theological vandalism. In that village, every person now knew what this son had done. The father's honor had been publicly stripped, the family name was wounded, and the son had left with the wound still open. The Kezazah ceremony, that detail from rabbinic literature, was used specifically when a Jewish boy lost the family's inheritance to Gentiles. The community would fill a clay pot with burned nuts and corn and break it before him. When the pot shattered, the declaration was spoken aloud, "You are now cut off from your people." The disgraced son would be barred from the community permanently. The son ends up feeding pigs, the most ritually unclean animal in Jewish law. Luke is using every cultural detail as a coordinate: how far the son has fallen, how far from home he actually is. Luke uses a phrase here that the Septuagint uses for prophets returning from ecstatic states. He came to himself, not he felt guilty, not he was sorry, he re-entered reality. In our video on metanoia, the real meaning of repentance, we established that the New Testament word for repentance never means guilt. What we didn't address yet, what it means to actually return. The son rehearses a speech. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants." This is a good speech, a safe speech, a transactional speech. Hired servant in Aramaic, sakir, was a specific designation, not a slave, a day laborer, a man paid separately, not part of the household. The son was planning to pay his father back. Here is a genuine fork in how theologians read this moment. The first reading, the son truly repented. The pig pen broke something real in him. The second reading, he calculated a survival strategy. Which reading you choose changes what his father's response actually means. He begins the journey home. But he doesn't know what's waiting at the village entrance. He doesn't know the elders are prepared. He doesn't know about the Kezazah. The Kezazah wasn't improvised. It was an established rabbinic legal procedure. The community had the right, the obligation, to formally declare the returning transgressor an outcast before he reached the family. The elders would intercept the returning son at the village entrance. The pot would be raised and shattered before a word was spoken between the son and his father. Joseph is walking toward home with a rehearsed speech in his mouth and a plan in his heart. He has no idea that before he reaches his father, the community will legally excommunicate him. The speech won't matter. Everything the son thought was possible, being received as a hired servant, working off the debt, earning his way back, was about to be made impossible. Not by his father, by the village. Curiously, Luke records a specific detail that most readers pass over without noticing. The father saw his son while he was yet a great way off. Not at the gate, not in the village, from a very great distance. Which means the father had been watching every day from a position of height with a clear view of the road. He had not moved on. He had not stopped looking. He recognized his son from a great distance, and in that instant, everything that was about to happen at the village gate became a race. Every time you've come back to God expecting punishment and found welcome instead, you were standing exactly where Joseph stood, and you may never have understood why that was possible. Luke says the father ran. In first-century Middle Eastern culture, an elder, a man of honor, did not run in public. Running required lifting your robe to show your legs. This was humiliating. Kenneth Bailey argues that the father was not running toward his son in tender eagerness alone. He was running ahead of his son, racing to reach the village gate before Joseph did. If the father reached his son before the elders could perform the Kezazah, if he embraced him, kissed him, welcomed him publicly before the ceremony could begin, the elders had no legal standing to proceed. To run was to humiliate himself, To humiliate himself was to absorb the community's shame before Joseph could receive it. The father was doing something that ancient honor culture said was impossible. He was trading his dignity for his son's restoration. The father gives the son a robe, a ring, sandals. In that culture, each of these was a legal instrument, not a gift. Bare feet meant servant. A ring meant authority. The robe meant restored sonship. Bailey notes that the ring given was likely a signet ring used to seal official documents. The father was not symbolically welcoming his son, he was legally reinstating him as heir, in front of witnesses. Sandals were the distinguishing mark between slave and son in first-century Jewish households. Bare feet went barefoot. Sons wore sandals. By placing them on Joseph's feet in public, the father made a legal declaration the village could not contest. The fattened calf wasn't a casual celebration. This was a covenant meal, the kind that sealed legal agreements. The entire village would have been invited. The restoration was being publicly notarized. The father's sequence was deliberate. Run first to cut off the Kezazah, embrace to establish claim, robe and ring and sandals to legally reinstate, feast to publicly complete the restoration. Every action was a legal move in a cultural game the son didn't know was being played. So the story is complete. The son returned, the father forgave, grace triumphed. Except there's a problem, a significant one. Here is the version of this story most commentaries stop at. The son sinned, the son repented, the father forgave. Grace is greater than sin. This is true, but it misses the mechanism entirely. There is an older brother in this parable, and he is furious. He has done everything right. He has never left. He has never asked for anything, and he cannot bring himself to go inside. He says to his father, "These many years I have served you. I never disobeyed you, and you never gave me a young goat that I might celebrate with my friends." This is not the complaint of a villain. It's the complaint of someone who believed in a merit system that just failed. The parable doesn't end with the younger son's restoration. It ends with the father outside in the dark begging a second son to come in. And that second son, that is where the real theological crisis lives. Before this parable gives you its full weight, it asks something. If you have ever believed that your faithfulness earned you something, that staying entitled you to more than the one who left, this story is going to cost you that belief. The theology the older brother held, "My obedience should secure my reward," is not the theology of this parable. And if you've ever been the older brother, if you've ever stood outside in the dark believing you deserved the feast, you know exactly how this costs. Now the Kezazah converges. The father didn't just run because he missed his son. He ran to destroy the legal machinery of excommunication before it could operate. The clay pot was never broken because the father absorbed the shame first. The father's humiliation, his public, undignified run, his robe raised, his legs exposed, was the price of his son's restoration. He paid the shame cost before it could fall on Joseph. He made himself the object of community contempt, so Joseph didn't have to be. The father's run did not mean his son deserved the welcome. It meant the welcome was possible because the cost had already been paid. That is not sentiment. That is the structural logic of grace. Someone absorbs the shame before the shamed person arrives. Joseph had a speech ready. He never gave it. He never needed to. The welcome came before the confession. The restoration came before the negotiation, because the father had already paid the entry cost. At the beginning of this investigation, we named what the son's request actually was: a public death wish, a cultural insult of the first order. And now we see why the father's response wasn't just kindness. It was the only move that could make restoration structurally possible. This parable isn't primarily about the prodigal son. It's about a father who dismantled the legal machinery of shame in public at personal cost to make the return structurally possible before his son could be stopped. And the father in the final scene leaves the feast again, goes back outside, into the dark, to find his older son. The same run in a different form, going after the one who stayed with the same reckless pursuit. Jesus was telling this parable to Pharisees. The older brother, faithful, obedient, standing outside in the dark, was not a cautionary figure. He was a self-portrait. Jesus was not condemning them, he was inviting them. The Pharisees were not the enemies of this parable. They were its second audience. They were the ones standing outside the feast, not because they were wrong to obey, but because they had confused obedience with ownership, and the Father was going after them too. There are two ways to end up outside the feast. You can spend everything and come home broken, or you can stay home, spend nothing, and still miss the party because you believed you had to earn the seat. The Father goes after both. That is the point. Luke 15 opens with the Pharisees grumbling that Jesus was eating with sinners. Jesus responded with three parables: the lost sheep, the lost coin, the lost son. All three end with a party. All three are an answer to the same grumble. The party isn't for the sinners, it's for everyone. The door is open. It was open before the son arrived. It stays open while the older son stands in the dark. The father keeps going out to bring people in. What this means practically: you don't need a finished speech before you return. Joseph never gave his. The robe was already on him before the first word came out. The return itself is the confession. If the Father in this parable represents how God receives us, and Jesus said it does, then the theology embedded here is this: God does not wait for a correct confession. He runs toward the direction of return. You don't need to get the speech right. You need to turn around. And if you're the older brother, if you've stayed faithful and you're standing outside because you believe your faithfulness should have secured something extra, the Father is outside with you, not dragging you in, inviting you. The feast at the end of this parable is also a vision of the church. The people who came back wrecked and the people who never left both belong at the same table. The Father is the one who makes that possible. The Father's run is also a model. When someone is returning from addiction, from estrangement, from failure, the question isn't whether they've finished their speech. The question is whether someone is willing to run ahead of the community's judgment to receive them first. There are two ways theologians read the older brother's ending. The first, he eventually goes in. The invitation is enough. The Father's love breaks through. The second, he stays outside, and the parable ends as a warning, not a resolution. Luke doesn't tell us. Which reading do you think Jesus intended? Joseph sits inside the feast. He knows what he did. He knows what it cost. But knowing the mechanism of grace, understanding the structural logic of the Father's run, is different from living inside it. That gap between knowing grace and inhabiting it is the question this channel keeps returning to, and we haven't closed it yet. The reason grace feels undeserved isn't because you're too broken, it's because someone absorbed the cost before you arrived, and shame has no legal claim on your return. Grace isn't what happens when you arrive, it's what ran ahead to make the arrival possible. If the Father's run precedes the confession in this parable, then there is a question embedded here we haven't opened. What does it mean that restoration was structurally complete before Joseph spoke? What does that imply about the moment before the cross? That door, we haven't walked through it yet. Joseph made it inside, but the older brother is still at the threshold, and Jesus never tells us what he chose. That silence is not an accident. It's an invitation. You now know the Father ran, not out of sentiment, but to destroy the legal machinery of shame before it could reach his Son. But the tree that started humanity's original shame wasn't about fruit, and the word your Bible translated as knowledge has been buried under a Latin pun for 15 centuries. Click the video on the screen right now to find out what Eden was actually about.